your total addressable market by channel and how there's a stickiness to shoppers. Somebody like me, right? Like I do loads of shopping on Amazon, where somebody like my wife, she'll shop on like 20 different platforms. She's very platform agnostic. And so if your brand is trying to get that Amazon customer that's like me, that's very sticky to Amazon, if I can't get it on Amazon, I'm far less likely to convert, but also to sort of maintain that story and tell that story, the new creatives are really the way to go, because oftentimes people will get primed. Like I'll see an ad on Instagram and I'll be like, oh, you know what? That's a really cool water bottle, or that's a really cool t-shirt or whatever. And then I go and shop for it on Amazon because I don't want to go through the Instagram checkout process. And then they're not there. And then that brand loses my buy. Hey everybody, welcome to E-commerce Mavericks. I'm here with Elizabeth Greene from Jungler. Elizabeth has been in the Amazon and PPC space for a long time and brings a lot of valuable experience. I've been following her for years. I learn a lot from her, and I'm really excited to get her on the cast and get to learn even more and doing a deep dive into Amazon PPC. So welcome, Elizabeth.
Thanks so much for having me. It is always good to chat.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about a holistic approach to Amazon advertising and sort of a higher order of things. So when a lot of e-commerce leaders and people responsible for Amazon at brands will come to me and they'll be like, look, Josh, we're doing okay on ads. You know, maybe we spend 20, 30, 40 grand a month. We have a good ROAS, but we just can't scale, right? So we're spending 50,000 with a 10 ROAS, but every time we go up, ROAS dives. What are we doing wrong? How do you approach scaling up PPC? And what should brands expect when they're in that growth and scaling phase?
That is a fantastic question. And you phrased it wonderfully. Holistic. That is my jam. So you want to look at advertising, especially when it comes to Amazon, as like you said, that like growth factor, right? That's what brands are looking for. Because in reality, what they're looking for is not just, hey, how can I scale up my advertising? Because that's great. But I talk to brands day in and day out where they go, hey, look, we scaled up our advertising. We increased our ad spend. Maybe we continue to hit that 10 ROAS, but wait, top line isn't growing. So if my ad spend and my ad sales are like just taking a bigger and bigger piece of the pie at some level, even if we're hitting that 10 ROAS, that's not a happy place to be in either. So you really just want to zoom out and look at the big picture. But you phrased it really good of like, hey, what can I expect? Because I do get those questions. I'm sure you do all the time with brands. Like, hey, if we handed you an extra $5,000 in ad spend, what can you do for us, right? I sympathize as a practitioner. Ad managers hate this question. It gives us like a pit of our stomach drop. We're like, oh my gosh, now I have to like figure it out, right? And the problem, what I coach my team through is like, hey, these questions are not being asked because they're like, hey, I want you to run my business for us, or, I need you to tell me what to do. Like the questions are like, I want to be able to grow. What does that path look like? Is there a way where I could grow? And there is, if you know how to do it correctly. The most difficult thing to do is to project off into infinity. And to be honest, it's impossible. So that, if I give you this, what is entirely possible? Where can we go? What, this, and you're like, that's why ad managers have that difficulty, because they're like, well, there's 20 different ways to build this. I don't really know what you want from me. And the brand's going, I need your help. And the ad manager's going like, I don't even know what you want, dude. And there's like this disconnect, and it's terrible. So what we try and do with our brands is bring it back to, okay, what is this that we're trying to accomplish? And let's just have a conversation here. Because oftentimes with brands, they're saying, okay, if I give you this, this extra $5,000, what does that look like? Where can we go? And say, okay, let's hold up. Let's even take additional ad spend off the table. It's like, hey, look, what are we trying to do? Are you trying to 2x your brand over the next 12 months? Or are we looking at, hey, a good 10% year-over-year growth rate looks fine for us, right? Those two ad strategies completely different. One is way more difficult, and the other one may or may not be given kind of the current brand. And then that conversation gives us a more a better idea of maybe how aggressively we need to push for this growth. Like, and then it is up to the ad manager to then go back to the account and say, okay, when we're talking about growth, like you said, we're pushing for growth. We want to maintain the same ROAS, and kind of circling back, and then you can ask additional follow-up questions, or we can have a further conversation along this line. But when it comes to pushing ad spend and maintaining the same ROAS, what has to happen there? And this is why brands historically have done this so often, right? They add more ad spend, ROAS goes up, crap, decrease ad spend, like, well, we want to grow. And like, it's this hamster wheel of like, we can't get out of where we are. We're stuck. The reason is because that additional ad spend, in a lot of ways, is a test budget. You're trying, the goal here is saying what additional keyword targets, what additional ad types, what additional match types, what else can we leverage in advertising that will bring us that 10 ROAS? Well, the problem is maybe we have a good idea of where to start this, but we have to run those advertising, put up those campaigns, and continuously look at them. Hopefully you're looking at them quite often because you want to optimize frequently, to avoid any wasted ad spend. There's that dynamic as well. But a 10 ROAS is a pretty conservative ROAS, which means there's only so much room for testing. There's only so many targets and things that I can set up that are going to hit that. Or maybe I set up those targets, they're not exactly where we want to, but the brand's going, hey, tomorrow we need the 10 ROAS, and I don't have 2 weeks to be able to optimize down towards that. It's like an all or nothing immediate return, and that's just not the way that ads work. And so the way we prefer to do this, which means it's going to be highly dependent on the brand and what the products look like and everything like that, is we sort of talk about it like stair steps to the goal. Because the thing is, everyone talks, it's a buzzword, like we're going to do data, making data-driven decisions, or that just means we're going to focus more on the, not necessarily known, because it's still a test, but the things that we have the most data to prove that they work.
Yep.
And then that is what we want to build in the account. The problem with that is the amount of things that are known or have, the most potential to be certain that they will work. Sometimes there's not that much of that. Sometimes it's only a couple $100 extra in terms of the ad spend test. Well, that's not going to get you an aggressive hockey stick growth, but you should have better returns on it. So going back, circling all the way back to the question of like having the conversation, hey, how aggressive we need to be? Is it just a 10% steady growth that we're almost kind of at? Do we need to 2x? The more aggressive you have to push for that growth, the farther you have to push into the unknown, because you need that massive traffic push. And typically speaking, the lower your returns are going to be in terms of your advertising. Now you're hoping to pay off in big returns as far as the ad spend, but then you can have that conversation. Okay, this is the amount of knowns. This is kind of what that ad spend's going to look like. This is the potential traffic. If you want us to push farther into the unknowns, absolutely can do that. But your returns are not going to be. So would you prefer lower returns and a more aggressive push because we feel like that's what you're going to need if you want to hit this goal? Or is the way where maybe we need to look at crafting those goals a little bit differently because you're not as happy with like the amount of ad spend that's going to require? And that's where the more collaborative conversations can come into play, and you guys can, kind of figure out what the roadmap looks like together, versus, again, almost feeling like both sides are going like, you don't understand what I'm asking, and both of them are just dissatisfied with each other, and that ends up, I'm sure, agencies, it happens far too often, to be honest. But you see, oftentimes what we find is we almost have to like steer brands into that more collaborative approach, and then we can figure out what that looks like.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're saying is look, we can expand and scale up your advertising. There's, like you said, more proven or data tested strategies that we'll add. But as we expand further, like you said, into the unknown, like these different keywords, these different placements, these different ad types, your return on ad spend is going to, or your ROI is going to lessen, but it will also educate and inform the follow along strategy. So when you do that, and as we're thinking about scaling up, do you track brand versus non-brand? And how do you kind of think about that? You know, because as some brands scale, yeah, you might be collecting a lot of branded search, and that kind of, you know, some people push back on that, like, well, you know, I would have gotten that anyway. And then sometimes maybe you collect a lot of non-branded search and you're not collecting branded search, and they're like, well, am I losing market share on my brand? How do you kind of pay attention, track, and hit those goals?
Yeah. So we use some tools. It's actually quite easy for us to track, even over time, to be able to analyze that. And as far as a more in-depth analysis, or not necessarily more in-depth analysis, because what I'm talking about is like it would literally take me 2 seconds to go into a brand and figure out branded and non-branded and then look over it. You know, last depending on how long the brand has been attached to our software, you know, I could look back over a long period of time. Um, the thing that we're looking at is when we're talking about growth is the ad strategy I'm employing on this product. So now we're at a product level, because really that's where growth happens. Tracking, I think, is much easier on an account level. Most brands at the end of the day think on an account level. We're very comfortable operating on an account level because it gets really complex and in the weeds when you start looking at product levels. And not all brands would have the capacity to be able to like sit there and analyze everything. So that's where we would come in with that analysis. But our question is, where can we get the highest return? So when it comes to pushing for growth, where do we have that data? Where do we have the most knowns? Where do we have the biggest levers? Because that's really what you're looking for. You know, everyone talks about 80-20. If you have a bigger lever, you know, you can move the world, right? So it's like, where is that biggest lever? And so what we backtrack is we would look at, you know, overall account metrics. Are we tracking towards goals? Then I would say when we're looking within product level data, which product has the greatest potential to move. So if we're talking about good returns, like what product's driving a ton of sales and is super profitable? At the end of the day, right? If we're already have momentum, it's already off the ground. We're not starting from one. We have data, right? And we already know it's super profitable. Well, heck, if we put more resources into this, even if it's most profitable, even if it gets less profitable, it's still more profitable than anything else in the account. So that's a great place. And then it's then diving into the ad structure and saying, okay, what does the ad build out look like for this particular product? And is it driving that growth momentum we need? And if not, again, what is our biggest levers in advertising? I think the biggest disconnect and the thing that I see a lot of ad managers getting wrong is going straight, the brand goes, okay, I need to grow, and then you dive immediately down into the ad console because they don't know another way to do it, and say like, okay, you know, what match templates am I not using, what ad types, what this, what that, you know, where is my growth leverage, which is great. That's not a bad thing, but if most of that data potential is on a product that is already losing money, and you add more fuel to the fire there in terms of ad spend, you're just going to accelerate that loss. And so from an advertising perspective, it may not be the wrong call, but from a brand or an account goals perspective, it is the wrong call. So it's having that sort of like what we call like the connector piece or middle analysis. To be honest, I should come up with some really cool buzzword for it.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, yeah.
If you have any
Own
ideas,
it.
let me know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's that middle, sort of the middle analysis piece where you say, okay, so which products do we focus in on? And then that will lead us to correct analysis in terms of advertising, which leads us to the correct like next step and decision.
Right. And so essentially what you're saying is we're building on the products that are working, what's working and what's not working, expanding where we get the highest ROI. And speaking of that, allocation of ad budget types, right? So we're still sticking sort of in the idea of the scaling, the expanding, branded versus non-branded, ad types, right? So as we expand, most people are traditionally stuck in sponsored products. I was talking to Michael Fichin the other day, and he's like, yeah, like 98% of ad spend goes to sponsored products. So some crazy high number. It's like people don't really tap into brands and display and DSP. So what are your thoughts on sort of adding those in? Should people focus on the allocation? Like, oh, I'm 98% sponsored products. That's a bad thing. That's a good thing. Should they care about the allocation? And what do you think about like a good allocation if they should care about the allocation?
I'll start with the last question first and then sort of work backwards off that, because I think a lot of people are looking for benchmark averages. They're saying like, where should I be in the averages? If you are all things humming, all cylinders firing, right? Typically speaking, it will just naturally work out to be about 10 to 20% on sponsored brand ads, maybe a little bit more if you're pushing into video, and then maybe about 5 to 10% on sponsored display ads, and everything else on sponsored products. Regardless of ad budget and how large it is, you will always see a focus in on sponsored product ads. Really, it's a function of a lot of ad inventory, is what it is. You think about sponsored display, right? Yes, there's off-site traffic that isn't as much as people think, so it doesn't really make up as many placements. And then in terms of on the listing page, well, you only have about 2, really 3 spots, roughly speaking. Some other things sprinkled in. There's just not that many. In terms of the sponsored brand headline ads, I mean, you have the one banner at the top, a couple, like they're sparse throughout, where think of how many sponsored product placements are on like the search page. A lot. How many sponsored product placements are on product pages? A lot. So it's a function of that as well. The one thing that we also have seen, and I always qualify this statement by saying like, I'm not saying I have anything against sponsored brands and display ads. In our observations through doing a lot of audits and cross analysis, sponsored product ads do have the biggest impact on organic ranking. Again, my personal opinion here is that that's due to a volume issue, but you can speculate how you will.
Well, and placements too, right? Sponsored products
Right.
being taking up a big chunk of the top of the page, except for that one sponsored brand.
Right. They look very native. There's a whole host of things that go into it. So there is that. However, again, regardless of ad budget, if you're going all cylinders, typically that split that I talked about is roughly where you'll end up. Anything where I've seen, because video ads do have really good conversions, and oftentimes if you're struggling to get results in terms of like your sponsored product ads, sometimes naturally the video ads, just because the creative a lot of times maybe is making up for someone not finding your offer as appealing. What I have seen though is that any account that sort of ignores sponsored product ads and where ad spend shifts below, I'm trying to remember the analysis we did, but I want to say it was like definitely below, around 50%, maybe even nearing 65%. A lot of those brands traditionally struggle with organic market share. So I will say that if you're going to like, oh my gosh, video ads the only thing that's working. I have seen that hurt brands. However, if you can't get a good return on your sponsored brand ads, if you can't get a good return on your sponsored display or video ads for whatever reasons, in that case, most likely it's your creatives if you are getting results in sponsored product ads. Solely focusing in on sponsored product ads, I have seen brands who are still winning and maintaining market share, even if they're solely focused there. So if you are struggling to get the returns, I will say I don't think I would have a problem with it. But if you haven't even tested it, in that case, I would recommend, that is sort of a next expansion. And pro tip here, again, we're talking about like building off of data, what we know works. Look and see what you're performing well in your other ad types and simply test it in the other ad type. Again, it's really as if you say like, okay, I'm converting really well here in the sponsored product ad. When you get into sponsored display, really sponsored brand ads, there's a lot of creatives that go into it, which is fantastic. You can share your brand story, right? You can direct traffic to your brand page. There's a whole host of things that unlock when you tackle that ad type. But if you're also testing like targets that you've never tested before, then you're like, well, is it creative? Is it the targeting? What am I doing wrong? But if at least you have a good directional idea of what works in terms of targeting, then you can say, well, maybe it's the creative, or maybe it's the landing page, or maybe it's something else. It narrows down the variables of, again, the things that you're testing and trying to see if they work.
Yeah, at the end of the day, advertising and Amazon is about a lot of testing. You mentioned creatives, which is something I think we haven't talked about in the Amazon space for a long time. On Meta, it's all about creative. And Amazon, for the longest time, hasn't even given us PPC marketers access to creatives. Now we have creatives through videos, headlines, bylines, custom images. All that's been rolled out relatively recently, I would say in the last year or two. And so I think Amazon PPC marketers are now going like, oh, like creatives, like we've got to focus on building great creatives as well, and then measuring the performance of creatives, which I think is a good thing for brands that have, because you can somewhat build a brand on Amazon, or Amazon's making it a little bit easier to build a brand on Amazon versus before, it was all just product versus product. And now, Amazon rolled out storefronts. Now they're giving us creatives. They're really letting people, I think, tell their story on Amazon and maintain the same brand aesthetic, brand story that they have on their other platforms, which I think has been a big positive change.
No, I definitely agree with that, because historically that had been one of the, I don't know, like one of the downsides, but a downside to selling on Amazon. It's like, it's definitely pros and cons, right? We're leveraging selling on Amazon because Amazon has built up the authority. Like, one of the most difficult things in ecom is being able to have the traffic. Amazon has built up such an authority that they have massive amounts of traffic. So what we're looking to do when it comes to on-platform advertising, we're just saying like, hey, how do I harness those eyeballs and get them on my product? That's really what we're trying to do. But in sort of doing that, like you said, it had historically been difficult to like build your brand or like have your own ecosystem within Amazon. It was very like Amazon centric, which obviously they need to keep the listings in a position where like it has to, like, so there's this weird marriage of it must still be recognizably Amazon, and yet we're seeing them roll out more and more ways, premium A+ content. Like you said, the store pages, there's some interesting things that people have seen in some of more of the premium brands that were like, fingers crossed when it's going to roll down into other brands to get accessible. Like with the whole video ads. That's fantastic. That's a phenomenal way to be able to showcase your brand, right? So I agree with you. Seeing more and more of these rollouts of Amazon saying, okay, we hear brands, we hear that they're dissatisfied with the fact that, it's so Amazon centric, it's so, innately like generic in some ways. Like, there was historically a lot of shoppers are like thought Amazon themselves were the ones selling all these products, and people are like, no, it's my brand, I'm building my brand, and everyone's like, oh, it's an Amazon. It seems to me, just in general conversation, shoppers are getting a little bit more savvy to that, and I think that it has to do with Amazon just allowing brands to be able to showcase themselves on the platform.
It's key and it's huge because the guy that founded Chubby's, Preston, he's been posting on LinkedIn a lot about sort of your TAM, your total addressable market by channel, and how there's a stickiness to shoppers. So somebody like me, right? Like I do loads of shopping on Amazon, where somebody like my wife, she'll shop on like 20 different platforms. She's very platform agnostic. And so if your brand is trying to get that Amazon customer that's like me, that's very sticky to Amazon, if I can't get it on Amazon, I'm far less likely to convert. But also to sort of maintain that story and tell that story, the new creatives are really the way to go, because oftentimes people will get primed. Like I'll see an ad on Instagram and I'll be like, oh, you know what? That's a really cool, water bottle, or that's a really cool t-shirt or whatever. And then I go and shop for it on Amazon because I don't want to go through the Instagram checkout process. And then they're not there. And then they lose, that brand loses my buy because, convenience, etc. Like you can't really control the customer journey like you used to be able to. Like you said, Amazon has all these eyeballs, right? And a sticky buyer who's really, you trust Amazon, who is comfortable buying on Amazon can buy in seconds and get it the next day or the same day, even on Amazon. And it's like you got to get in front of them while also telling your brand story and maintaining the power of your brand aesthetic and being like, and also too reminding people, right? If I see an ad for a product on Instagram and I see it on Amazon and it looks entirely different, there's going to be some incongruence, right? A lack of trust. I'm not really going to understand what that brand stands for. I might not even buy it because I might not know, is that the same thing? Whereas if you're telling the same story on all your channels, you're able to capture those sticky buyers and bring them into your brand fold, which I think is a huge win on Amazon.
No, I agree. And I think one of the benefits of the platform is not only have they been able to garner the amount of traffic that what they have, which is huge. People going through just looking for something generic, I want a desktop mouse or something, right? So there's that terms of traffic. But then there's also the flip side, like you said, of the trust that they've built up through their easy return process and their quick shipping. So there's a lot of other platforms. I agree with you. I'm the same. I'm a very Amazon centric buyer. Maybe that's a personal bias just because that's the ecosystem in which I work. So there's like a typical like built-in affinity there. But also for me, I will shop on platforms where I know I'm going to be taken care of as a customer. What I don't know on the Instagram platform, again, it's just because I haven't really tested it, or maybe TikTok Shop or some of the other ones, which I have purchased through TikTok Shop before, but I don't know if I'm going to be taken care of as a customer, especially if it's your own Shopify site. I I would hope so, but like, are returns easy? Is the customer service easy? We'll talk about, like seller support all day long, but in terms of when you're on the customer side, it's very easy to talk to someone. It's an incredible customer service experience. And so, like, I have an example, like, there was a really interesting, funky set of headphones that I found, which I love, by the way. And I found them on TikTok. Someone was reviewing them. They're like, oh, there's this interesting. And I was like, wait, that actually solves something that I feel like I, as a consumer, would find very, very appealing. I went to Amazon and searched it to purchase it, right? Because I trust that platform. I know I'm going to be taken care of as a customer. So it's really, when you're on Amazon, it's being able to not only harness the traffic, but also just that, consumer trust.
Yeah, it's hard to beat what Amazon has built in terms of consumer trust. And but when you think about sort of like how Amazon competes, and I know we're getting outside of the Amazon PPC world, I saw the other day at Accelerate, right? Like Amazon's now going to start showing delivery times for on TikTok ads. And so it's like Amazon's taking their built-in trust, that moat that they have, and they're taking their built-in logistics network in the US, which is incredible, right? There's a fulfillment center everywhere. Everybody gets same-day shipping, super fast shipping. That sort of moat, and then they're plugging it into TikTok and partnering with TikTok, which has the eyeballs, right? And I've seen loads of studies done that like Gen Z is far more likely to buy off of social media. And so Amazon's kind of trying to integrate themselves into what they don't have, which is that social network, right? That social network effect, those eyeballs for people that are just, scrolling all day long and saying, okay, well, what if we can leverage our logistics and leverage our fast shipping, the trust that we've already built in. Everybody knows it. It's sort of Amazon. We have 90 billion Prime subscribers, and capture some of that revenue and pull some of that away that way. And it's a really cool thing they're doing that I think will have a lasting impact on social commerce. I think Amazon in the future might even sort of become the backbone from a logistics standpoint for social commerce in the US. Like as the next TikTok comes along, et cetera, they don't worry about the logistics side. They just handle all, hey, keeping the eyeballs on the platform. And Amazon gets to do all the delivery and stuff. It's kind of an interesting idea.
I think it is an incredibly smart move on Amazon's part. This is some of my interesting just observations more as a consumer. Is that I don't think any platform, TikTok a little bit, they're starting to with TikTok Shop, but actually TikTok is a really interesting built-in dynamic with their TikTok Shop and how they're doing it. But um, I don't see any platform that I'm aware of, at least in the US, maybe overseas, that has really tackled or mastered, if you will, the dynamic of entertainment and purchasing power. there's a lot of really interesting, so like Amazon is a classic, and they have some really interesting, like they've tried like Amazon Posts or Amazon Live or other things. It's like, hey, but it's like when I want to be entertained, I'm not going to go to Amazon. Like that makes no sense. I'll go to TikTok or Instagram or these other ones. And so these other platforms, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, have sort of tried to, so they are like the social platforms or the entertainment platforms. They're trying to solve that e-commerce piece, and none of them really have. So this dynamic of a really interesting platform like TikTok, which I am a personal consumer and probably should not as much as I,
Yeah, I
as I
know.
do,
It's so addictive. Yeah.
but they're sort of like trying to see like, hey, can we have the best of both worlds? Can we get a platform that is innately like really good at the entertainment piece and just add in our expertise in terms of the e-commerce piece? So I'm excited for the future because, to be honest, if I was on, sort of that post and was like, wow, this is a really interesting product, let me just click the button and purchase from Amazon. As a consumer, I think I would find that dynamic really useful. Say what you will about consumerism and the fall of society and anything personal, but just from a consumer standpoint, like, I'll be honest, I'm lazy. I want an easy button. Like, have me think it, know that it's in my budget and have it show up at my door tomorrow. I'm down. Like, is that terrible? Probably. I mean, but I would prefer not to have to spend additional brain cells if I don't have to.
I'm with you. People at the end of the day are lazy. We get just lambasted with information all day long, and we just want, like you said, an easy button. And Amazon really provides that. Awesome. Well, Elizabeth, I could talk to you all day long about PPC and Amazon. Would love to have you back on. If people want to follow you and learn more or even work with you, where should they go?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you heard what we said in the beginning of the conversation and said, hey, I need a scalable way to grow my sales on Amazon without having to sacrifice profits, that's our jam, that's our bread and butter. So I definitely recommend reaching out to us on our website would be the best place for that. So it's jungler.com, JUNGLR.com. And if you're just interested in terms of seeing more information about Amazon advertising, I put out the most content on LinkedIn and then also YouTube.
Awesome. So LinkedIn, YouTube, Elizabeth Greene at jungler.com, JUNGLR.com.
Yep.
Thanks for coming on, Elizabeth.
Thanks so much for having me.